Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor for me to inform you that among us here we have the Honorable Mr. Usman Kasong, Director General for Information and Public Communication, Ministry of Communication and Informatics, Republic of Indonesia, Mr. Tan Jitong, Assistant Director, Culture and Information Division, ASEAN Secretariat, Her Excellency Yuyun Wahyuningrum, Representative of Indonesia to the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, Mr. Damar Juniarto, Advisor of Southeast Asia Freedom of Expression Network, Mr. Mark Brian Manantam, Director of Cybersecurity and Critical Technologies Pacific Forum in Honolulu, Hawaii, Mr. Nicholas Gaspar, Director of UN Information Center, the Honorable Board of Directors of CSIS, Executive Director of CSIS, Mr. Yose Rizal Damuri, and Deputy Executive Director of CSIS, Ms. Medelina Henditio. The recent ASEAN Ministerial Conference on Information highlighted Indonesia's proposal for combating fake news, indicating a growing regional momentum for coordinated action against misinformation. This context sets the stage for a comprehensive study conducted by CSIS Indonesia under the Safer Internet Lab project in the second semester of 2023. We cordially invite you to the launch of the study report today, where we will present actionable insight and policy recommendation to address the complex crisis of disinformation in Southeast Asia. Through this event, we hope that we could facilitate multi-stakeholder collaboration, present actionable policy recommendation, and strengthen regional early warning system to combat coordinated disinformation campaigns. Our discussion today will be consisted of the first welcoming remarks, and then followed by keynote speech, book handover, study report presentation, discussion, and closing. First of all, I would like to invite Mr. Yose Rizal Damuri as the Executive Director of CSIS to give welcoming remarks. To Mr. Yose, we welcome the time and place.
Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the CSIS event, the launch of study report on regional and cross-border responses toward this information in Southeast Asia. I'm really glad that you're here and to share your thoughts and to have a discussions with us on the very important, what we think is a very important subject that currently still haunting us and need to get an appropriate response. When I look at the list of speakers today, I'm really surprised actually that we managed to get all of you the very prominent persons to share insight and to speak and to be the panelists of our event today. So that I feel the need actually to greet you one by one and also to say some things on CSIS behalf. First of all, I would like to welcome Bapak Usman Kasong, who generously spare your times to be able to be here, although you just come from Bali, Pak Usman. Pak Usman is the Director General for Information and Public Communications in the Ministry of Communication and Informatics, Republic Indonesia. I also would like to welcome the speakers of our event today. The first, Mr. Jonathan Tan Jikyong. Thank you very much for being with us here. Mr. Tan is the Assistant Director of Culture and Information Divisions in the ASEAN Secretariat. Of course, I would like also to welcome Her Excellency Yuyun Wahyuningrum, the representative of Indonesia to the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. Ibu Yuyun here is a really a big supporter of CSIS because she always comes to our invitations. Never say no to our invitations, and hopefully we will also still have a big support from the union. Also I would like to welcome Mr. Damar Juniarto, Pak Damar. Oh, oh, the back, Pak Damar. Maybe, well, it's easy for you actually to be in front, to get to the front letters. Yeah, but Pak Damar Juniarto is the advisor of Southeast Asia Freedom of Expression Network, the SafeNet. Thank you very much, Pak Damar. Also, Mr. Mark Bryan Manantan, the Director of Cybersecurity and Critical Technology Pacific Forum in Honolulu, Hawaii, who spent 27 hours in a flight to come to Jakarta and also to be able to be with us, to participate and share the insight with us. Last but not least, Mr. Miklos Gaspar, thank you very much, sir, for being with us, the director of the UN Information Center. Of course, I would like also to mention that the current events would be presented or would be delivered by Mr. Balsajar Krisetia and Dr. Fitriani, who will be presenting today to look at on the several important aspects of the report. And maybe a little bit of backgrounds of the sales. CSI sale programs, the Safer Internet Lab in CSIS. CSIS has been following the digital issues actually for quite a while. Since 2016, if I'm not mistaken, we try to look at various issues related to digital. But normally, we look at the positive side of the internet and digital technology. What we can do to utilize the digital technology. But for few years, we actually also observe that the digital technology did not only bring us the positive aspect, but also brings a negative side of it. Maybe you can call it the dark side of the digital technology. And one of them is the misinformation and disinformation. So we started with this Safer Internet Lab at the end of 2022, 1.5 years ago, by trying to look at that kind of dark side of the internet, dark side of the digital technology. We started to look at, we focus more on the misinformation and disinformation, especially related to the political activities, because we know that during the election years, misinformation and disinformation tend to be increasing, tend to be growing. And since Indonesia currently and also last year is in the political years, then we start by focusing on the misinformation and disinformation related to the political situation, political activities in Indonesia, especially related to the elections activities. But of course, this kind of problems, misinformation, disinformation, for fake news, and so on, it's not only unique to Indonesia. It also we can also observe it in other Southeast Asian countries, or even in many other countries. So that it's a significant threat to democracies, human rights, and also social cohesion. So that with that background, actually, we try to extend our studies, our observations, and also our attentions not only to the situation in Indonesia here, but also at the situations in Southeast Asia. And so right now, or this year, we are going to have more studies, more activities, looking at what happens at the in the Southeast Asia at the regional level, and also try to find some responses or some policy responses, policy actions that can be that can be used to reduce or to respond to that misinformation and false information. So this research, the study research that we are launching today, it's a kind of like a preliminary study. It's a baseline study for us to be able to look at what the situation in Southeast Asia, the situation in the regions in more details later on. It will give us a mapping, a kind of mapping, a kind of policy, a kind of snapshot to the current situation in Southeast Asia. And hopefully, although this is still very a preliminary report or a preliminary studies, a baseline studies, we still hope that we can get something out of it, get recommendations, get perhaps some kind of policy actions based on the research and the finding of our study. So again, I would like to express my gratitude to all the participants, including representatives from ASEAN member states, perhaps, and also friends of in ASEAN countries that supports this kind of study, as well as stakeholders in from various sectors that allow this kind of study to be presented today. I would like also to thank the organizing teams who managed to bring all of the prominent persons to come to Jakarta and to share the insight with us. So I look forward to fruitful discussions today and constructive outcomes for the policy recommendations. Thank you very much for your participation today. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Yoso, for the welcoming remarks. Next, I would like to invite the Director General for Information and Public Communication, Ministry of Communication and Informatics Republic of Indonesia, Mr. Usman Kansong, to deliver a keynote speech. To Mr. Usman, time and place are welcome.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Good afternoon, Honorable Yose Rizal Damuri, Executive Director CSIS Indonesia, Mr. Tan Gittiong, Assistant Director Culture and Information Division, ASEAN Secretariat, Ibu Yuyun Wahyu Ningrum, Representative of Indonesia to the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, Pak Damar Juniarto, Advisor of Southeast Asia Freedom of Expression Network or SafeNet, Mr. Mark Brian Manantan, Director of Cybersecurity and Critical Technologies, Pacific Forum in Honolulu, Hawaii, Ibu Fitriani, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Digital platforms are becoming increasingly referenced by the public due to the convenience they offer. However, the massive amount of information in the digital space poses challenges in the form of the spread of misinformation and disinformation. As many as 62% internet users globally have seen false information on social media or online news channel, according to Reuters Institute 2023. Media users are more concerned about authenticity of information on the internet. More sophisticated technological development can also be misused to spread the disinformation, such as the use of data to personalize news preferences, to use of deepfake or speech synthesis. I think some months ago, there were the speech of President Jokowi using Mandarin language. Of course, it was defect because our president could not speak in Mandarin. And after that, there were speech of the President Jokowi in Arabic language. That was the defect. One of the phenomena of information disorder in the digital space at the global and regional levels is the spread of disinformation by external parties. This can be understood as a situation where foreign parties use this information to manipulate public opinion, including through the use of buzzers, especially when entering the election period. As mentioned earlier by Pak Yose Rizal, in the 2019 election, the noticeable trend emerged, showcasing a rise of hoaxes related to election issues. The total number of identified hoax issues between 2018 to 2019 reached 714 issues. In comparison, over the past year, from January 2023 to January 2024, there were 204 reported hoax issues related to the election. This year, statistics seem to indicate a lower figure compared to the last election period. However, the forms of the disinformation are increasingly diverse, making it more difficult to identify. Not to mention the use of artificial intelligence for creating content that resembled a person's face or voice. With a little carelessness, anyone can be exposed to disinformation. Ladies and gentlemen, the urgency of handling this information can be seen from the regulatory landscape of handling global disinformation. Currently, many countries have begun to increase the provision of strengthening regulations for handling disinformation. For example, Singapore, through the Protection of Online Falsehood and Manipulation Act, prohibits the uploading of false statements. Violators can be required to publish correction statements or even have their internet access blocked. Apart from Singapore, there are also similar regulations such as NetzDG in Germany, the UK Online Safety Bill in the UK, and the Digital Service Act in the European Union. In our region, the issue of hoaxes and disinformation in ASEAN is specifically discussed through the ASEAN Task Force on Fake News, TFFN. Last year, the ASEAN TFFN successfully improved the ASEAN guideline on management of government information in combating fake news and disinformation in the media. Through existing regulations such as the Law on Information and Technology or Undang-Undang ITE, government regulation on the implementation of electronic system and transactions, and other related regulations, the Ministry of Communication and Informatics continues to provide comprehensive measures to deal with hoaxes and disinformations. We hope that through these efforts, our information security will be stronger and more productive. I wish to appreciate CSIS Indonesia for conducting the study regarding formulating regional and transnational response towards disinformation in Southeast Asia. This is a significant contribution for us to have comprehensive insight in addressing disinformation without harming human rights, collaborating with various elements of society, even with other countries, and seeking solutions that can be applied both nationally and regionally. With the increasingly seamless spread of information, it is time for countries in Southeast Asia to work together and strengthen the trust of the people in the region. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Usman, for the insightful speech. Coming up, we will be hand-offering the book of regional and cross-border responses towards disinformation in Southeast Asia. I will call Mr. Yusri Zaldamuri as the representative of CSIS and SAIL to come forward. And first, we would like to have Mr. Tan Jitong as ASEAN representative to receive the book. Mr. Tan Jitong, please come forward, receive the book and take the picture. Mr. Yusuf, you can stand here. And second, we would like to have Mr. Usman Kansong as the representative of Ministry of Communication and Informatics Republic of Indonesia to receive the book. Thank you very much. You may go back to your seat. And now we will hear about the study report presentation on regional and cross-border responses toward disinformation in Southeast Asia, which will be presented by our researcher, Fitriani Bintang. To Ms. Fitriani, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for coming here all the way from Honolulu, from Block M, from Senayan. And I really appreciate your support to the addressing this information in Southeast Asia. My name is Fitriani, and it is an honor and pleasure to be here with you to present a Safer Internet Lab finding on the regional and cross-border response toward disinformation in Southeast Asia. First, I would like to share with you how does the social media landscape in Southeast Asia looks like. Firstly, we saw 68, almost 70% of the Southeast Asian people have social media, and they spend at least 10 hours a day on the internet, both for work and also for leisure. Now, what happened with this landscape? We saw previously this region slowly adapting to industry and technology. And when social media comes up, it becomes a new source of information, an alternative source of information compared to what previously trend was coming solely from the traditional media, from the government publication. So it becomes, and most people believe that whatever they read in the social media, whatever they watch in TikTok these days, or Instagram or Facebook and other things, even WhatsApp, are the truth. But is it really? And this becomes very concerning because the political landscape now are using social media as part of spreading information on politics, the very underlying structure on democratic countries in the Westphalian system of state on how the government change and rule. So, so our finding that is different with other research in the region is our research is regional in base, and other countries in the region, most of the countries in the region only observe um, disinformation methods done within a country, like the presentation for done by Bapak Usman before. Notice this the proclivities, the prevalence of how many disinformation in Indonesia. We know in the Philippines there's fewer files that document some similar occurrence, but as Southeast Asian country are governed with the respect of sovereignties and trust with the region, there is an issue of cross-border scope and foreign disinformation that is to some extent state-sponsored, but of course we can discuss later to what extent is state-sponsored, whether it's farmed, whether it's funded, or whether it's allowed by negligence by the state, and allow the cross-border nature of this information occur. And this happened because of the fragility of the region that have sub-regional conflict, as we know, the South China Sea, as we know, tension in the southern area of, for example, let's go to Indonesia first. We have Papua, southern area of Thailand, as well as Indonesia. And of course, the report is sanitized. We don't write all of those because it can be sensitive to countries, and we would like to have this accepted by all countries in the region. And going forward, Safer Internet Lab is aiming to become the hub for research on this information in Southeast Asia. So in this moment of presenting this report, we would like and welcome your advice on how we can address the issue of domestic disinformation as well as cross-border disinformation together. So we're looking for advice and collaborative suggestion on how we can create and base this finding going forward. In Indonesia itself, the political campaign are using AI, for example, to propagate and to produce and disseminate fabricated news and propaganda as being shown as our former president, I have to say. He already passed away, Suharto, and he suggests to vote to certain political parties. And of course, this is very fabricated, as well as the Chinese-speaking leader that mentioned by Bapak Usman. But unfortunately, the region has not have a formal statement in terms of agreed definition of disinformation. But we have, each country have a formal policy regulation that spoke on the policy of inaccurate and misleading content, whether wholly or partially, on its own or within a certain context. Internationally, we also recognize UNESCO have its standard on what is false information that is deliberately created to harm a person, social group, organization, or specific country. What we see in the region is agreement among internal and international regulation on addressing this type of information that is purposely crafted, that is misleading and completely fabricated, and using not only traditional media, trying to, but we see it more often in the new type of media. Now, in Southeast Asia, we already have regulation that deals with this information. As perhaps, I hope I write the whole history of agreement between countries in the region in regards of how to use media responsibly. So therefore, the news circulating in the region is true and without any and able to minimize harmful effect. Because what we want in the region is a peaceful, inclusive, resilient, healthy, and harmonious society. That's always the goal. And that is why, as Bapak Usman mentioned, since last year, um, there have been effort by the countries in the region to combat fake news and disinformation in the media by the government, Ministry of Telecommunication, as well as this year in February, the ASEAN issued guide on AI governance and ethics. So why is this important? Because the region, not all the countries in the region are up to par or in the same level in terms of priority, knowledge, and capacity in addressing this information. And therefore, having this regional framework is really useful to benchmark as well as to harmonize regulation. Now, if I may go to the finding of our research, we kind of put a typology on what country trends are facing in terms of their misinformation and disinformation. I'll try to put all the 11 countries here, and mostly what they're facing is disinformation during the election, as well as social media controlled by the regime or to control the anti-state individual, hate speech toward marginalized and minority groups. We see, for example, the Rohingya and also LGBTIQ, as well as effort of foreign disinformation to disturb the stability of a country, especially the country that have not a non-homogeneous or heterogeneous community within it, in an effort to undermine the government efforts, so to disturb public trust. So as I mentioned here, as you see, government in the region have put mostly legislation because what government do is to craft legislation. However, to what extent are this legislation is effective, or this legislation are actually repressing or restraining the freedom of information? And perhaps later in the discussion, our speaker would speak upon that. But it is an intricate balance to know how we need to control the disinformation or address the issue of disinformation, as well as allow freedom of expression. Need to also mention that in the region, aside from the regional approach, we have other approach in the region. For example, what is most common is promoting media literacy. It is done in Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Singapore. Content moderation, done in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Philippines. Empowering journalists, done in Cambodia. I don't know whether Indonesia need empowering journalists, especially or other country as well, because we know journalists are becoming rare and few, especially they have to compete with the newer technology. Fact checking, Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Timor-Leste doing it. But in our focus group discussion, their question, to what extent is the fact checking is effective? And who are checking the fact checker? So always that's the question to come up with that solution of who observe the observer, for example. And the challenge also to make them sustainable, because they usually from top down. There's also learning from international collaboration. We learn later from organization outside the region as well from UN that will share what they do. And UN seems to be the organization that countries in the region learn from, at least for Brunei, Myanmar, and Timor-Leste. But we also learn in the report, we managed to include the country ability or proclivities to limit access to the internet because in the way to maintain social order and prevent chaos, to limit the access to the internet, for example, in Indonesia and Myanmar. Okay, that's the reality. So sometimes we want ideal, but we need to live in the reality. And this is the real recommendation for state. And this looks like a laundry list, and probably it's already been implemented, but probably I will reiterate again. First, the government in Southeast Asia need to push more for media literacy and critical thinking, to push for the knowledge not only for the people, but for the government as well, to observe pattern, trends, actor, scope of disinformation, and economic model that push for disinformation. Second is responsible sharing of information. Even for state publication, state needs to be open, to learn to practice openness when share their information. This is particularly important for key opinion leaders or influencer. The use and help of the influencer need to be clearly stated on what the information from, how, what it aimed for, and whether the information is sponsored. Maybe it's not straightforward for information, but it would be benefiting for the share. The third is transparency and accountability, to urge the government to improve its public communication, coordination, and collaboration between government agencies, especially during time of crisis and emergency. So when there's a crisis, before shutting down or trolling, but slowing down the internet bandwidth, there need to be information, because research have been found when there's internet limitation, groups of minority become more prone to attack from the majority, and they need safe area to find access to the internet to report if something happened to them. The fourth is independence and integrity of the media. This is why journalists need to be supported and allowed independent periodical studies to monitor the prevalence of disinformation in the region and develop appropriate policies to create early warning system or mitigation processes. Five, as we saw before, the approach the government like is legal and regulatory measure imposing standards in Southeast Asia, as we mentioned before, in the agreement that is adopted by the region. Fourth, we encourage local and community reporting in terms of disinformation, and we saw that happening, but perhaps it needs to be supported by government because the grassroots journalism sometimes doesn't have enough resources to continue on doing it. And fourth is the regional collaboration to implement the agreed common norms when dealing with information. When dealing this information, because we know not all the government have the resource, and if they don't have the resource, what should they do? So this is perhaps for the cross-border disinformation, an issue that can be looked at going forward. Now, in our research, what is interesting is the concern of the platform. We saw that the platform are actually one of the actors that kind of further the disinformation with clickbait, and they want to have viewers. And given that, although we're sponsored by Google, but I think they don't mind, although they have YouTube and all, but we kind of asked for the digital platform to have transparency, to disclose the funding and ownership of information in the digital platform, and share their fact-checking mechanism and whether they're effective. The second, fact-checking. The fact-checking done by platform needs to have multi-stakeholder approach, especially with people in the local language, when because this information that fueled in the local level often use local language, and therefore the localization of fact-checking is important to have a diverse setting knowledge. The third one is on user education, having empowerment of user to have the initiative to increase access of information, to have alternative medias, and reduce echo chambers. But of course, some people say that if you empower the user, it means that the platform would not take responsibility. So this kind of, I'm sitting on the fence for this, but it is a good thing when, for example, Instagram and TikTok have this banner saying that this information need to be checked before you share, or something like that. That would be beneficial. The fourth is enabling environment, having the local language, diversity, fact checking, and access to local fact checking. And fifth and lastly is the collaboration, to encourage more collaboration between government, CSO, and also organization in the region as well, to improve effectiveness in moderating, especially large volumes of content, flow of this information, especially the one that is cross-border and observant in local language and culture that happening in that share among the region. And as well as maybe sharing the best practices for community guidelines is encouraged. That is the finding from our research, and I welcome for you and our speakers today. I thank you for coming here and to share your own organizational experience in addressing this information, and perhaps give suggestions for our next step. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Fitriani, for the amazing presentation. Coming up next, our main event, the discussion session that we have been waiting for. We are inviting Ms. Ratna Aini Hadi, Research Associate at the Safer Internet Lab, as today's moderator for the session. To Ms. Aini, time and place are welcome.
Hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time today joining us at this event. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Aini from the Safer Internet Lab. I am a research associate at SAIL. I'm delighted to be your moderator for the following panel discussion session that we will hold for the next hour. Disinformation is an ever-evolving threat, especially with the development of AI technologies and evolving strategies of public opinion manipulation. Although at times it may feel like we are chasing a moving target, we must not rest, and as the report emphasizes, we are stronger together. For our session today, we have the honor of welcoming 5 esteemed experts representing diverse perspectives, and their presence will greatly enhance our discussion on tackling the challenges of disinformation in the region. Without further ado, let's begin introducing our 5 esteemed panelists. I will call them one by one and to come up to the front. Firstly, please welcome Mr. Jonathan Tan Kityong, Assistant Director of the Culture and Information Division at the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta. Second, yes. Hello. Okay. Second, we have, okay. Sorry, continue. Second, we have Her Excellency Ms. Yuyun Wahyuningrum, representative of Indonesia to the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. And next, we have Mr. Damar Juniarto, advisor and founding member of Southeast Asia Freedom of Expression Network, also known as SafeNet. Next, we welcome Mr. Mark Brian Manhattan, Director of Cybersecurity and Critical Technologies at the Pacific Forum. And last, but certainly not least, we welcome Mr. Nicholas Gaspar, Director of the United Nations Information Center in Jakarta. Thank you. Hello, lady and gentlemen. Thank you very much for giving us your time today amidst your busy schedules. We are indeed very honored to have you here today with us. In this discussion session, first, we would like to hear from each of you your thoughts on the report. And as each of you brings a unique perspective to the table, we are eager to hear your insights and suggestions in regards to combating disinformation in the region. After everyone has done their part, we will have time for a Q&A session where we will give a chance for the audience to ask questions for our panelists. During this discussion, each panelist will be given 10 minutes to share their perspectives, and I'll provide a gentle time reminder when the 2 minutes are when there's a 2-minute reminder. Okay, I think first let's start from the person farthest from me, Mr. Jonathan. The time is yours.
Hi, a very good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank CSIS and in partnership with Google to extend the invitation to the ASEAN Secretariat to serve as a panelist at this discussion. I think that the report, the baseline report itself, I think resonates well with us because we think that, every stakeholder, be it the media, the social media platforms and providers, and of course, researchers and research institutes have a part to play in fighting fake news. And therefore, I think that we applaud you for having put together this baseline report. And before I share 4 observations in response to the report, perhaps I just want to share a personal story. Back in the long distant past when I was a teenager, I used to receive press clippings, press reports on UFO abductions, life after death stories, and some even very weird and odd, news from my sister who was in the United States. And I think that was very interesting because those are reports that are being put in print. And then I saw these, clippings, and I think it really fed your imagination for creative writing. Fast forward to today, I think that fake news, it's something, if you really think about it, it's very long-standing. It's not something that is there only in the last 10 years or so. Of course, social media itself has certainly, when it came online, that has certainly actually accelerated the pace like the proliferation of fake news. But if you really think about it, far before the time of social media, I think fake news is really ever present there as well. And I think certainly that right now, where we look at fake news and synthetic media, commonly known as deepfake, are suddenly become even more concerning than before. And the question has always been, what intrigued me has always been that why is fake news something that is a lot more appealing than the normal regular news that make people really latch on it and really, disseminate such fake news. And therefore, I want to just share 4 observations that also speak to the recommendations being made in the report itself. And the first one is really that I do agree with the report that there is the need to continue to inculcate that critical thinking mindset, especially among the younger generations and the Gen Z who are actually living on TikTok for news consumption. And I think a few years ago, Cisco has put out a study that showed that the internet traffic, 80% of it and more are actually visual. So if you really think about it, visual consumption has become so prevalent, and now with deepfake, I think it makes it even more concerning for all of us. And related to this point, I would also say that the role of the media, the fourth estate, I'm using a very old word here, the fourth estate has really a critical part to continue to play in fighting fake news. It's not a question about turning journalists into fact checkers. I mean, that is also very important for them to do their own fact checking as well. But I think one thing that is very important is that we need to continue to cultivate public interest journalism to shine through and ensuring that local community reporting, gets its attention as much as national level reporting as well. And I think that that is a way to also counter the proliferation of fake news. One other point I want to make is that I think students and of course educators should probably also introduce students to news, understanding news 101. And by that, what I mean is really understanding what is balanced reporting. I think that this is something that has become less appreciated over time. Partly also because that we are living in a world of a creator economy where users and users here, I mean not just the media, but even individual users, social media influencers, are in a competition to generate content and information that sell. And while we could say that fake news sometimes are being motivated by monetary awards or rewards, many times it's also because of a result of, say, trying to sensationalize a sensitive topic, or that is really to stoke sentiments to a certain cause. And I think that that's where we need to make sure that readers and consumers, especially the young generations, are able to better appreciate how news are being produced, news is being produced, and more importantly, what is balanced reporting. I think the fundamentals is something very important there. The second point I want to make here is that when it comes to fighting fake news, I think a lot of concentration and focus has been really on media and digital literacy. And I don't think that's wrong, because there's something that needs to continue to be strengthened. But I think that when we talk about all forms of literacy, I would also say that attention literacy is something that is very important for us to really think about promoting. And what I mean by that is that, and this is not really coming from me, but coming from a research paper done by the United Nations as well, that when we look at the world that we are living in, we are so inundated with so much information that information is being pushed out at the lowest possible cost, and at the cost of our attention as well. And given that each of us has less than 24 hours of attention span daily to be able to absorb all this information out there. And therefore, I would say that it's very important that we think about attention literacy. In other words, how we ensure that people are aware of how their attention is being exploited and monetized, and also about how the consumption of such information and content may also affect their own well-being as well. And last but not least, of course, the importance of understanding our own logical fallacies and cognitive biases. And fact checkers are not saints or gods that are able to be free of cognitive biases and logical fallacies. And therefore, I think that this is also something that fact checkers themselves will also have to be educated on and made aware of their own cognitive biases. The third point I want to make here is that when we talk about fake news in today's era, we know that it's not just a result of technological developments. It is actually a social and psychological phenomenon, if you like. And I think that that's where it's very important that when we think about fighting fake news, I think this is also reflected in some way in the report as well. It's very important that we also think about how we make use of technology, enabling the technology to disable technology that proliferate fake news and misinformation. So I'm not a technical person, but if you think about algorithms are being used to create, online scams or fake news, then likewise, I would think that we can use algorithms to detect and respond to fake news. And the question is that how we improve the efficacy of such and leverage, generative artificial intelligence to do so. And the final point I want to make here before I stop is that, if I still have time, is that I think trust is really important. And I think that it's very important that we need to continue to foster the trust, especially to safeguard the authenticity of the voices of the governments and the authorities. And to do so, to be consistently authentic, I think it's very important that what we need to look at is really about two things: strategic communications, effective strategic communications by the authorities. And the other thing is, of course, that pre-bunking sensitive and controversial topics in advance, so that people are well aware of where the pitfalls are. And so I think these are very important considerations that I'm just putting out here. And I will speak a little bit about the next steps, from a regional perspective, if I may, later on, but I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jonathan. Very great key takeaways of the 4 points. First, critical thinking, building a critical thinking mindset, and also focusing on attention literacy and how attention is being exploited and monetized, as well as understanding our biases, maybe working on reflecting on the work of fact checkers. It's very important. And also using the tools that pose a threat instead to help combat the issue itself. So thank you, Mr. Jonathan. We will pivot a little bit next to Mr. Nicholas. The time is yours.
So thank you very much, and congratulations to Dr. Fitriani and the team for really the excellent report. So I'm the director of the UN Information Center that's based in Jakarta, but has a bit of regional responsibility also. So for me, it was particularly interesting to see how, rigorously you have compared the approach among the 11 countries in Asia. So I talked a bit about my reflections and possibly suggestions for you. Then also about the UN's initiative on developing the code of conduct and information integrity globally. And then also a bit about our own experience last year at the UN Information Center here on fighting disinformation and actually hate speech on the ground in Indonesia. So what to me again was the most interesting aspect of the report is those tables where you contrasted what the different governments are doing. Now, granted, ASEAN is not a homogeneous, group of countries, except for their geography, very, very different. And freedom of speech exists in some countries, not in others. And perhaps, I'm not, but if I were a government person in any of your countries, that would be for me the most interesting is, okay, what can I learn from the others the other steps I mean, I would like to learn from the other free speech countries, of course, but it's there is no mistake to the side. What is clear though from your report is that no matter what the countries do or have done, disinformation is a problem everywhere. And as we know, and as it's been said earlier, that's absolutely not unique to Southeast Asia. So there's no clear solution at this point about how to fight, disinformation. If you put in place 10 fact checkers, then there are 15 people creating disinformation. If you do 100 fact checkers, then there are 200 buzzers. So it's like there's bad detective novels. There's always more criminals than detectives, but the detectives always win it. So what is also clear, at least in my mind, is the real difference could come not from governments, but from the platform. They are the ones who are the gatekeepers to this information. And, without them, governments can pass legislation, but, these are big international companies. To be honest, not so much that can be done by each government on its own. And, perhaps that's where ASEAN comes into the picture. I mean, ASEAN is bigger than the governments. It can offer a platform for governments to unite and speak up, to some of these platforms, or it can represent. So for me, that's sort of my takeaway as a possible next step. Maybe not so much for research, but for governments, is okay. How can they get together and work together to put, and let me underline, very intention pressure on platforms to take fighting disinformation, but particularly hate speech seriously in a way that does not curtail free speech. So in terms of what the UN is doing, I recognize some of you who've come to our discussions on this UN voluntary code of conduct that's being developed for the information integrity of digital platforms. This work at the UN stems from COVID, you know, when there was all this misinformation about how COVID spreads and vaccines. But then it's taken on a life of its own because, you know, as has been said before, there's disinformation in all kinds of areas, including politics and state, as you mentioned. So let me just read out a quote from the UN Secretary General. Digital platforms are being misused to subvert science and spread disinformation and hate to billions of people. In the UN, there's a summit of the future that's being organized for the end of the year for countries really to talk about what a new international system could look like, you know, because the current one was developed right at the end of the Second World War and is not very fit for our current world. And there are 11 areas along which this is organized. And for the UN, fighting disinformation is so important. It's one of the 11 areas in what's wrong with our world today. So the UN is really putting a lot of emphasis on this. This code that's being developed, this code of conduct is going to be voluntary. It's not like a typical, you know, UN negotiated framework that every country signs. Why not? Because those things take decades to develop, and you know we don't have decades. So the people in charge of the UN thought, let's do something that's voluntary, but hopefully there'll be public pressure of governments in their own countries to actually sign up. And also, as I mentioned earlier, governments actually are not the main stakeholders in this, the platforms. A treaty is for governments. A code of conduct is for everybody involved, including the platforms and the media. So hence the decision to create a voluntary code of conduct, which really, I mean, it's still being developed, but there are three recommendations, or three areas of recommendations that are sort of highlighting. One is to really disincentivize online harm. And, you know, you mentioned, as you presented the report, that because of the business model, platforms are actually incentivized currently to provide, I mean, what sensational news, at least, you know? And news that you as a reader, a particular reader, already agree with. So therefore, if you believe the earth is flat, you know, you'll be given content about the earth is flat. And that's because that's how they maximize eyeballs, you know, people like this turn around in their own circles, and then they get more revenue. So for there to be a different kind of revenue stream, and for these revenue streams also to be more transparent. And in general, we'd like this conduct here require higher level of transparency from the digital platform, so that they share their data, so that researchers like you guys can actually really find out, you know, what's going on, where was this particular piece of disinformation. Also, and this has been mentioned, so I won't dwell on it, this anti-usury. To provide people skills to think critically. In your report, you mentioned that in society is not as educated, this is a bigger issue. But frankly, it's a big issue everywhere, right? I mean, countries, you know, developed countries in the West, which we like to think of as educated, disinformation and hate speech are just as big of a problem. So yes, it requires some education, but that's nothing. So we had consultations in about 30 countries worldwide, and Indonesia was one of them last December. And we forwarded views from government, civil society organizations, academia, and the media, excuse me, to the people in New York working with this. So the last thing I want to just briefly mention is our own experience on fighting misinformation, with hate speech. Last November and December, regarding Rohingya refugees in Indonesia. The reason we got involved in this is because Indonesia is not a party to the Refugee Convention. So all refugee issues in Indonesia are dealt with not by the government, but by UNHCR, the UN Agency for Refugees. And, you know, I'm like the spokesperson for the UN, so I work with all these organizations, including the UNHCR. So Indonesia used to actually welcome Rohingya refugees to provide them, you know, a safe place until there's a, you know, future for them in some other country. So it was very surprising that along with the current of both season, all these hate messages and disinformation started appearing on social media, on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. And what we saw is that actually these were organized messages. I mean, they appear genuine, but we did some textual analysis, and we found that actually there's just too much in common in these messages for these to be genuine. We reported this to the platforms, who did nothing. None of the platforms did anything at that point. They didn't even respond to our reports. I mean, they reported, malicious content, hate speech, quoting their own policies and how this content contradicts. Then we went to Cominfo, and in fact, they were more helpful. So when they contacted the platforms, then some action was taken. The action was still symbolic because by that time, so many weeks had passed that this information was everywhere. But the fact that the platforms took down the post that we identified as the source of this was symbolically important, even though that guy, the next day created another account and reposted that information. Still, we counted this as a victory. What worked for us the most is actually collaborating with academia and media. Media in this country and this region is still important, which, I've only been here a year and a half, but I love that. I'm a former journalist. I lived in Europe where media doesn't count anymore. It's so good to be in a country where media. So anyhow, social media is not in a vacuum. People have access to information from different sources, including media. And the media was very susceptible to our information that we shared about the Rohingya refugees, about their fate, about, who is funding their stay here. It's not the government, it's the UN. So, when supposedly protesters, probably organized, Aceh complained that, why is the money going to refugees and not to us? The government isn't spending. So that's, very well false information, but it's misinformation, disinformation, that can be. Anyhow, the result was that we did manage to debunk the myth that it was organized disinformation, it was genuine disinformation. On Twitter and on Instagram, we also managed to turn the tide, not on TikTok. And also, we did not manage to stop the disinformation. As you may have followed, there was an unfortunate, very unfortunate incident just last week, 2 weeks ago, about the voter capsized. That's what the media, people can use in the media, but there's a lot more. What last information on is the three refugees who actually survived. They're saved by heroic fishermen and the search and rescue team of the government. When they landed on shore, they were faced with again hate speech, offline hate speech. Go where you don't come here, go back to wherever you're going. So starting from social media has led to genuine hatred towards basically. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholas. It is very important that you bring up the fact that the importance of digital platforms in the conversation as well, and maybe the role of ASEAN to leverage where perhaps individual governments cannot move alone. And also your experience with disinformation regarding Rohingya refugees and mushrooming of hate speech, and in fact that you found as actually organized. So hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that a bit later. Next, we would like to move to Her Excellency, Ms. Yuna Hernandez. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, I would like to thanks for having me here, and congratulations for the launch of the report. And I welcome the recommendations. I was looking for a recommendation for ICHO, the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, but it is none. I was so disappointed, considering that Fitriani is very well versed on ICHO. So, but I highlighted on the need of having a regional cooperation for especially in ASEAN and what ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights can do about the issue. As a guardian of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, of course, the increase of the incidences on misinformation and disinformation become one of the concerns of ICHO, as it compromises the measures on promotion, protection, and fulfillment of human rights. Misinformation and disinformation is also one of the concerns of ICHU since 2019. In one of the workshops in relation to freedom of expression and opinion, participants suggested that ICHU need to focus more on freedom of expression and opinion online, particularly addressing fake news, misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. And we comply with the stakeholders' suggestions. So in 2023, we organized the online, we organized a similar forum on freedom of expression and opinion, focusing on online and looking at misinformation and disinformation online. And there has been a lot of highlights on gender perspective into on this misinformation and information, especially to what extent women as well as children become the actors as well as the victims of misinformation and disinformation. In 2024, this year, January, I chair with the EU having the joint activity on seminar in relation to freedom of in relation to misinformation and disinformation. ICHR and EU has been discussing this concerns also since 2019 in the third ASEAN-EU dialogue, and then the fourth ASEAN-EU dialogue, and then the fifth ASEAN-EU dialogue, and agreed this is our concerns, our common concerns, and we need to deal with it together and look at the practices from the two regions and how to address the issue. Not to compare, but rather to look each other and to learn each other, because as a report also mentioned that disinformation and misinformation is actually borderless. Every month, I also receive the report on, they call it as digital hate, from organization working on human rights in Myanmar, particularly against Rohingya. So I receive a lot, as well as SafeNet also send me reports on digital authoritarian. Is it correct? I still do not understand the concept, but that's always have been highlighted by civil society in their reports to ICHR. I checked this morning whether ICHR has received a complaint in relation to incidences on disinformation and misinformation, perhaps, but it seems like it was rather framed into human rights defenders, abuse against human rights defenders, rather than frame it as misinformation and disinformation. But at the same time, ICHR also appreciate that contestation in public sphere is very important. It's very good. It's supportive to democracy, but without civic and civil discourse, and without ability to see beyond one's on point of view on social media, some individual may have the propensity to become more intolerant and look into their own filter bubbles and echo chambers. And we have been seeing this when we deal with the issue of counter-violence extremism. Very often we also face with the polarizing opinion at the individual and group levels. We also see, we observe number of false content in social media, as mentioned earlier, lead to potential conflict in the region. Our focus more on in this region, Southeast Asia, but I believe this is also happen in different region. The report, I also found the report and agree that misinformation and disinformation are having a profound impact on democracy. Cyber troopers in Indonesia, perhaps called buzzers, in Philippines called as troll. Is it troll? Contribute a lot in the mushrooming of the content in relation to misinformation and disinformation. And we deal with that almost every day. While disinformation is not a new phenomenon, the increase in which organization and individual can disseminate information widely, especially through online means, has made it's imperative to understand the address, its spread, and implication. Careful policy design and implementation, coupled with effective public communication and buy-in, is integral to whole of society approach in tackling disinformation. The report suggests very prominently on a legal approach. I do not think it is effective. Well, laws are sometimes necessary, but non-legislative mechanisms like fact-checking websites, critical thinking mentioned also in the report, um, uh, critical thinking intervention, cyber hygiene initiative in schools or curriculum in schools can be extremely useful. As mentioned earlier, that even before you finish drafting the law, another form of disinformation will come again. So in our seminar, the ASEAN EU seminar, Black Dot, this organization based in Singapore, also come up with study on that misinformation and disinformation in the region, focusing more on politics and government's action, immigration and xenophobia, ethnicity and religion, economy and cost of living, generation divide, and geopolitics. Depending on the context and also the timing on the time, some disinformation and misinformation have been produced. The impact to society, as mentioned by Black Dot. So ICHR has no research on this or study on this. So I borrow our discussion, the information that we obtained from our EU ICHR seminar in January to provide some of the context in Southeast Asia. The impact, as mentioned by Black Dot, it's erosion of social cohesion, exposed vulnerabilities, conflict, and contestation. And under each of the element has a lot of implications. But why do people fall for information? Black Dot argued there are at least four: bias, confirmation, and popularity; poor information literacy; sense of cohesion and community with like-minded individual; and distrust with media and institution. So therefore, I think when we address the problem, perhaps we need to at least address these four. But for me, distrust with the media and institution becoming very, very important, a part of build the capacity of individual and population to address the issue. Institution here refer to government. So we also recognize as ICHR that less and less trust to government. So how we deal with this distrust of government? Who should be trusted? I think it's also mentioned earlier by the speakers. So this continue to be our conversation on how to address misinformation and disinformation within the context of distrust to the institution. At the moment, ASEAN is developing the ASEAN Vision post 2025 or ASEAN Vision 2045. I think it is important to include these concerns related to misinformation and disinformation to become part of the community blueprint. I would like to invite CSIS, SAIL, as well as Google to submit the inputs to the task force, high-level task force on this, so they can include into part of the action plan. At the moment, the high-level task force has finalized the vision. So now they have to translate the vision into strategic action and then strategic action into action. So, three level of drafting, but uh, uh, the presentation earlier from the researcher mentioned about number of uh, 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 framework which should be also included in the blueprint, like the declaration on the prevention, culture of prevention. So I believe it will be included as well, some element on that. But allow me also to look at some areas to be addressed in dealing with misinformation and disinformation, as we discussed it in Singapore this year. Right? So I take a benefit of having that kind of discussion for this presentation. We should go beyond access and participation divides. We continued earlier. I remember we talked when we talk about digital transformation, we talk about access, we talk about participation divides. But now we are dealing with more specific issue, and then should go beyond access and participation divides. Reinforce and broaden literacy efforts is very important. I think it has been highlighted by previous speakers as well as in the report, and establish ecosystem approach, such as to improve the quality of journalism, partnering with trusted media and technology platforms to spread the corrective information and debunk falsehood. Again, this has been repetitively mentioned by some of the speakers, including this earlier Pak Usman Kasong in his presentation. And very importantly, to also identify the vulnerable communities related to disinformation and misinformation. I also would like to highlight on the ACWC and UNICEF initiative on having the annual ASEAN ICT Forum, especially addressing how misinformation and misinformation impact children. Last year, they organized it in 2023 in Bangkok, and I was amazed with the way even game can be used to lead children to either commit extremism or commit any other crime without them knowing it. So, but there has been number of efforts from different private sectors and governments, but it need more because the speed of this misinformation and disinformation has been very dramatic. Another situation that ASEAN has addressed is on scamming trafficking. People will to be scamming information, and now there is an ASEAN declaration on the use of counter trafficking person and the use of technology, in which ICHR will be organizing one activity this year addressing the scamming trafficking as well as the non-punishment principle of the trafficking person. As we've learned from the victims and survivors of scamming trafficking, they were they they uh, they they believe on the information provided in social media in terms of um, uh, uh, opportunity to work abroad. So, but then they fall into, first they become victim and then they become a perpetrator, because they have to recruit people from their own country in replacement, if they want to being free from being beaten or exploited and so on and so forth. So we see the connection between misinformation, disinformation, and exploitation in the case of trafficking in person. And this particular interests have been included in the Bohol Work Plan 2.0 and trafficking in person in ASEAN. So now we are implementing this project. So now we are looking at how misinformation and disinformation impact different groups, specific groups. We are not looking at only general, of course, very important, but we need to look at it in very specific groups. ACWC
So, you have about 1 minute?
Yes, this is my last point. The SCWC also come up with the ASEAN Declaration on child protection online. This is another good initiative to address. Well, IHR has not come up with a declaration similar with declaration, but now we are working on ASEAN Declaration on Environmental Rights, in which misinformation and disinformation in relation to environment will be addressed. And we haven't been able to explore on AI in serious manner. We continue to receive complaints, concerns. We discuss about it, but we haven't been able to address what kind of human right approach need to be done in relation to AI. But from the workshop into 2023, participants suggested there should be a norms in ASEAN in relation to AI, governance of AI that was actually adopted this year. To adopt inclusivity, oversight, transparency, security, safety, accountability, non-discrimination, and intersectionality as principles of the AI governance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hassan. So a key takeaway, I think, from what Ms. Ruben has just said is the importance of focusing also on vulnerable communities, women, children, as well as how disinformation and hate speech can be harmful for example, in the case of trafficking. Okay. So we are halfway from this long line. It's over the hump day, if it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Mas Damar, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So the Thursday man will speak after this. First of all, thank you very much for CSIS and Seven Internet Labs team, Baltasar, and everyone. We've been working together, I think, more than 1 year. So, and also for Google and Santa at the back, for having me here. I would like to give a congratulations first for the baseline report, but I will start by giving you my point of view. So my point of view coming from a former leader of SafeNet, Southeast Asia Freedom of Expression Network, the regional digital rights organization based in Bali. We've been monitoring the disinformation in a different way with the fact checkers, because we are focusing on the online harms aspect of the disinformation and how it will impact to the democracy. The second, so after leaving SafeNet now, I'm starting an initiative on research agency called PICAT, Pusat Informasi Kecerdasan Artifisial dan Teknologi untuk Demokrasi. Very similar with, I think we also focusing on the providing research and also information regarding the emerging technologies like AI, but focusing on the impact to the democracy as well. So from that point of view, coming from civil society, academics, and also people of ASEAN, because I'm people of ASEAN, and people who live in Southeast Asia, I would like to be honest to this report that's not answering a lot of my views on what's happening in the regional disinformation landscape. I feel not satisfied with the landscape information. For instance, the previous speakers have already mentioned about Rohingya, but I would like to also say we found a lot of transnational repression coming from information operation, not only happening in Indonesia, also it's also happening from as well. For instance, how's the Russia doing a war, the propaganda on Ukraine, and also Russia using Tribun Timur in Indonesia. So they paid this Tribun Timur. They release a lot of information and get a lot of um, readers and also viewers coming from their YouTube channel, and they get money for that. And then the second, other than that, we also found um, um, as the Prime Minister of Taiwan alerts that the China IO is also have impacted towards the Indonesian last election in this year, in 2024. So I can give you those sources to the researcher just to make this baseline more giving a best picture of a snapshot of what is going on. The second one that put me not very happy with this because there is no recommendation for civil society. There is no recommendation for fact checkers, academics, media. My friends at the back from Mapindo who's doing every day fact checking the news, the social media, or even like civil society, the academics who is producing a lot of information, saying that in the line of disinformation, actually they are the one who's doing that in front instead of the government. Like so, but then I also wants to understand more from the researcher and also say what is the thesis of behind this study? What is the image, your imagination? Because you're relying much on the government solution. And then to be specific, you're relying on the regional responses. What do you mean by regional responses? Is it coming from the idea that disinformation is a global problem? Then your takeaway, then this is the response through regional. But why regional? Why not local? Like those questions is, I had those questions in my mind, and I think I need more information from the researcher to understand what is I think what is the reason why you keep on focusing on the government imports and also regional responses. And then another one that I want to share for everyone is my personal point of view on how the government handle this information. So we had a DRAPAT, Digital Rights Asia Pacific conference here last year. And we have like informal discussion. And then one of them of my friends said that, do you not do you know that the way our government dealing with this information is very similar on the way they are doing the against drugs, the war on drugs. And then he said that um, they publish laws against drugs and they arrest the spreaders and users. They burn the drug factory and site. And the funny thing is they rarely or touch or never touch the source, the bad actors. So that's the idea. So since 80s until now, we're still fighting against drugs. So the same thing with disinformation, probably the similar way of seeing disinformation, not striking into the bad actors, not striking into the source, but instead the government chasing those spreaders, those people who spreading on the social media, not chasing into the heart of the disinformation, the problems. So um, so the questions that I put in the last screen, one is can or whether the government and ASEAN can be part of the solution, because this report is also notified that some of the government use this disinformation as well. They produce the disinformation. Can they be part of the solution? And then since politicians and also political parties using disinformation as a tool against the opposition, so this is also mentioned in this report. Can they also should be excluded from the part of the solution? And then if we are identify them already as a part of the bad actors and then part of the problems, why not relying on the civil society as the key stakeholders to win this our global effort to address this information? So I know it is hard for everyone here to listen for this, but I have to be honest with you that the global effort is there. The regional responses is there from civil society now. For instance, there's Anna here from UNESCO. I have to mention that UNESCO is supporting many effort from the civil society. For instance, Koalisi Damai in Indonesia, consists of 12 organizations now led by P3S, doing something directly on the strengthening the civil society against the disinformation. The second one, I attend this year to RISE, accountability and also responses in South ecosystem. It's a community, a global community who wants to fight disinformation directly with dealing with dealing with the digital platform, and but using the power of civil society. So those two global efforts that I thought you might also know because uh, will give a big impact, and also I can believe I trust them that they can be part of the solution. And then there are many regional responses. I will try to mention one by one. So please, anyone here from civil society, probably we can add more. There is APEC Fact Check Alliance. There is Asia Fact Checker Network led by Black Dot Research Singapore. There is CIT, Southeast Asia Coalition on Fact Accountability led by Digital Reach. There's CCPN, the Southeast Asia Collaborative Policy Network led by SafeNet and also FMA from Philippines. So I think those landscapes should be incorporated in this baseline to give a better perspective for everyone, including your recommendation, and by saying that we should do a multi-stakeholder approach and also multi-phase of the solution to help the government to know and also the ASEAN to know that those civil society doing a lot, and they are they are in front of the government, because their solution is not relying on the legislation, not relying on the regulation, and outside of the box, not thinking uh, the strategy which is very similar on like fighting the drugs. So they are looking a lot of initiative. Then I think if you want to succeed in the region, you have to incorporate them, and then also probably working together with the civil society to find a better ways on this information. Lastly, this is the effort from the civil society. 4 years monitoring of 9 countries in Southeast Asia. It's very big, as Yulian has mentioned. SafeNet is also part of this ASEAN Regional Coalition to Stop Digital Dictatorship. which is the concept of digital authoritarianism, probably better explained here rather than me who is explaining it to you. But I will invite everyone to read this and then to know that this information is also part of the problem, not just because it was there because of the social media, but also because of the government using this information as a way to silence the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Master Noor, especially for highlighting the importance of including holistic perspectives from all actors that are active in combating disinformation, especially civil society who are in the front lines. And hopefully, maybe later in the Q&A session, that we can also reply on that comment. Okay, last certainly not least, we have Mr. Mark.
I could just sit here and just listen to all the speakers of, I think, got all the incredible insights and observations already. But first, before I give my remarks, I'd like to thank the organizers for the very generous invite to Google, of course, to CSIS Indonesia and Safer Internet Lab. And I just have a couple of observations, but I'd like to commend the team for putting together this study. I think this is something that I'll take to the United States, given the upcoming presidential election that we're going to have in November. I think a lot of us there would definitely learn from this incredible body of work. Looking at the sort of the approach to the study, very familiar names who conducted reviews. I know some of here are peers from the region like Dimples, Jenilyn, and other scholars have been working really hard to raise awareness and knowledge and expertise and research, not just in academic research, but in policy as well, in the realm of disinformation and misinformation. I think this research is really I find it quite novel in the sense that we hear a lot of literature about disinformation, misinformation from the global north. And I think it's about time that Southeast Asia would have its own imprint regarding its own novel ways and approaches in combating disinformation from this perspective. I'd offer, because I'm mindful of time for us to also have a lot of further discussions, I'll offer 4 observations that I hope that the team, that Fitri and the rest of the scholars who are in this report would be taking into consideration as they move forward. As someone who also conduct this type of study, I don't think the work is done here. I think once you release a report, you open it up to the public, the work continues. And I think there is that opportunity for the researchers to refine and improve such body of work. But it also sort of like marks a juncture of a new knowledge has been created. And so I think the 4 authors in this report deserve all the commendation that they deserve for the effort that they put out. 4 observations. I think the first one would be our expectations towards ASEAN. And as one of the speakers mentioned, ASEAN is not a homogeneous entity. And disinformation and misinformation are often associated are often associated with democracy. But I think we have to be very honest amongst ourselves that ASEAN member states are not a perfect democracies. They're often in a continuum. And I think that's really a very important baseline of how we really expect Southeast Asia's point of view regarding disinformation and misinformation, because not all of them are in the academic sense and also in the practical sense of definition of what democracy is a perfect democracy. And it's a spectrum. And this would give us a better sort of footing in terms of understanding how the laws, how the regulations and the frameworks that are included and compiled in this report would work. Because as one of the speakers have mentioned already, some of these laws can be weaponized by the state to further amplify prosecution and undermining of human rights. And I think understanding that each ASEAN countries have different starting points also leads me to this argument that each government would prioritize these policy issues differently. Less digitally mature countries, of course, would put cybersecurity threats or disinformation, misinformation at the aperture or at the apex of policymaking, while more digitally mature countries, such as, for example, Singapore or Malaysia, would be more very proactive in enacting not just laws and regulations, but really calling for more multi-stakeholder approaches to disinformation and misinformation. The second point would be on cybersecurity. Oftentimes, we think about disinformation and misinformation as fact-checking, narratives, and all these other how we interact with global ICTs in terms of how they monitor their platforms. But oftentimes, we've observed that whenever there is an election campaign, there was a peddling of disinformation, misinformation. Cyber attacks on electoral systems and processes are also happening. So as we look towards the implications of disinformation and misinformation to the social and cultural fabric of the society, I think we also have to remember that restoring trust, restoring the integrity of institutions that preserve democracy, such as commissions and elections, as well as even journalists. I think we often expect them to be the gatekeepers, to be the fact checkers, but they're also constantly being attacked by Pegasus, by spyware, and all these other harassment that they sort of face in the realm of or in the sort of cybersecurity threats. I think it's also very important to temper our expectations on what civil society and media can do. Because at the end of the day, civil society are very funding driven. We can only do research as much as we can with the availability of resources that we can tap into. Our research is also as good as with the data or information that, for example, we can get from Google, we can get from Twitter, we can get from Meta. So I think tempering the expectations of what it's good to have like a civil society led approaches, civil society initiatives, journalists conducting fact checking, like what Fitri mentioned about Verifiles, which is an NGO of journalists based in the Philippines. But all of these are resource strapped and resource constraints organizations. I think I'll just end with the final point that often we focused on Western platforms, Facebook, Google, Alphabet, Meta. But I think increasingly in Southeast Asia, we also see the emergence of non-Western platforms such as Line, such as KakaoTalk, such as WeChat, which of course are not always in the spotlight when it comes to disinformation and misinformation. But increasingly, there is a Chinese diaspora, of course, here in Indonesia, in the Philippines, and Malaysia that use WeChat. There is an increasing diaspora as well. For example, the people that uses Line in Thailand and to some extent in Japan, and also in Taiwan, where disinformation and misinformation are definitely very rampant and prevalent. And so I think we need to take a very holistic approach, not just towards Silicon Valley-based ICT companies, but also with those emerging tech companies that are present in the region. I think I'll just keep my remarks very brief. I'd be happy to talk more about artificial intelligence, deepfakes, bots, and digital sweatshops. But again, I'd like to commend the team for such a great piece of work. And I look forward to, I think, the phase 2 of this study, of this great initiative. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mo. So everyone has spoken, and I mean, there's a lot of really interesting, how do you say, discussions that we just heard, especially in the focus where we need to really broaden the view to include all relevant actors, as we see CSOs, the government, media, everyone is of course involved and has a shared responsibility, and also to think about how regulations, not only from formal regulations, but also non-regulation efforts. Before we open the floor for questions, maybe we can have Marfitri to respond. Oh, okay, the floor first. Okay, so I'd like to open the floor for a couple of questions. If there are any. Yes. Oh. Thank you so much, Mr. Nicholas. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much. Yes, let's open the floor for some questions. And comments, of course. Yes. On the third row, please state your name and affiliation.
Thank you. My name is Dimita from Lemonade. Thank you very much for the report and the presentations. I have very simple questions. Is that how do you regulate platform at the regional level here in ASEAN? I know we can't compare it to the EU where the regulatory framework is quite comprehensive there. There are many guidelines and framework in ASEAN, but I was wondering like how much are these guidelines actually push platforms for more transparency and accountability? And if there's any other ways for ASEAN as an institutions to also push platforms for more responsibility in the region, as disinformation is beyond borders and cross countries. And there's a lot of cases that we know, some disinformation happening in Myanmar, but the creators are sitting in Cambodia, doesn't even speak Burmese. Or the Malaysians having misinformation coming from Cambodia, for example. So I just want to understand like how do you deal with this? Perhaps this is more to like the Asian Secretariat and also Mbak Yuyun, but also Mas Damar, if you can comment as part of the coalitions in the regional level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margarita. Another question. I saw a hand over here. Yes. Yes. Yes, it's coming in 5, 4, 3.
Thank you. I just like to make a comment concerning the situation in and around Ukraine, as it was mentioned in one of the statements. Okay. Well, I think that this situation was mentioned one-sidedly in a biased way. Well, I have to deny all the unbased allegations. Made on Russia and on so-called threats. What is? Okay, it's working. Huh? Okay, yeah. On the so-called threats from Russia to Indonesia or to any other country of South Asia. You mentioned the war, okay, but you didn't tell anything about the roots of its war, or of this war. I don't want to plunge into the subject because I don't think it's an appropriate place to discuss it, and we will need a lot of time for this. However, I can assure you that all the information that is provided by Russian officials, by our ministries, is checked and double-checked. So it can't be of any threat to anyone in the way you mentioned it, of course. I would like to also to add that if we talk about the impact of the situation of the war in Ukraine, we have to mention, the illegal sanctions imposed against Russia and how they affect the trade and the situation and the relations against other countries. The sanction, and then one more thing: there are not only sanctions imposed in Russia, but there is still a threat of secondary sanctions against other countries. Yeah.
Excuse me, sir. Maybe do you have the question regarding what we have?
No,
talked about
I just said
today, or?
I just said that I would like to make a comment
Yes.
on this particular point. So the secondary sanctions, they also hamper the developments in South Asia, and all over the world. So I think that the situation in Ukraine isn't worth to be mentioned here because all the discussion was very fruitful, very interesting, I can assure you. But regrettably, it was pronounced, so I couldn't but react.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, for your reaction. Let's go back to answering the question that we had earlier from Badinita from Luminate regarding how to regulate platform and how to incentivize platform for being more open and transparent about their data. We are losing our members slowly, but if Yuyun or Mr. Jonathan have some comments on that point.
In ASEAN, the issue has been dealt with different sectoral bodies. So it is so as but ASEAN deals with more governments than the non-governments. So for instance, some of the declaration is to bring commitment of individual member states on certain action. Usually that's how they deal with the topic, not necessarily dealing with a platform as mentioned, like Facebook or Twitter and others. And you can see individual countries have a different reaction to the platforms. Singapore reaction to govern platforms there is different from others. So, but the function of ASEAN is to bring together first to identify the problem as a regional problem, and then to identify possible action that can be done collectively or committed at the regional level, responses at the national level. For ICHR, we engage with, as much as possible, we engage in dialogue with private sectors, including some of the online platform, and to understand better how they deal with some of the complaints submitted to them. So for instance, when we ask about because many of the victims told us that they use Facebook a lot. That's how they receive information about job opportunity abroad. So we asked whether Facebook has a reaction to this, and they have come up with a new and updated community policy. So they identify some of the words that send the alarms to those who are in the conversation. But unfortunately, when the conversation happened in the inbox, they cannot enter because that's a private area that even the platform cannot enter. That's how they told us. And then if they identify some of the words or terms, then they send information to Barreskrim here in Jakarta, because it was in rather Jakarta context, and police in Jakarta will be able to react to the reports. So that's how we engage with social media platform. In terms of actors or perpetrators, that's the reason why important having this ASEAN declaration here and there. So for instance, I give the example of Indonesian become the traffic person victim of trafficking in Cambodia. So Indonesian police work together with the Cambodian police, and then getting information from Facebook. Of course, and then of course there has been a number of debates between the two, and then finally the perpetrators were identified, which is actually non-Cambodian citizen. It's Chinese citizen. So that is why I think more and more government in ASEAN need to look at beyond Southeast Asian countries because in the case of Cambodia, the locus of trafficking or exploitation happen in the free trade zone area in Cambodia, which is different regulation applied to this area. And then many Chinese companies operating in this free trade zone area. So that is why it becoming complicated. But now I think ASEAN has come up with this has been included in the agenda of the ASEAN labor inspectors forum. So they have this, not forum, conference. ASEAN Labor Inspectors Conference is a meeting of many labor inspectors. So the concern can be expressed in this kind of forum or in this network for individual inspectors or countries inspectors on labor to be able to come up with the early warning or early identification of possible victims. But the arrests done by the law enforcement in the country, not outside of the country. So Indonesian police may not be able to arrest someone in Cambodia because it's beyond jurisdiction, and unless there is a agreement. So that's, I think, but that is something that has been discussed also in trafficking person, because trafficking person led by some thesis in your official meeting on transnational organized crime, mainly coming from the police department of 10 ASEAN countries. So they also discuss about this and how to bring together cooperation in relation to sharing of information. But the arrest, the prosecution done by individual member states. In the case of corruption, well, we had a number of examples that we can use on cross-border and transnational crime issues. On corruption, well, we had experience when Indonesian corruptor in Thailand can be arrested by Thailand police, but that's because there's a bilateral cooperation.
Thank you. Mr. Mark, what do you think about how regulation?
I think regulating ICT companies, I think ASEAN can learn a lot from the EU. We always have this concept about the Brussels effect, and if you're well across the issue of the EU AI Act being enforced, I think, or adopted at the EU Parliament, that would inform future directions and how countries, not just in Southeast Asia, but also I think increasingly in Latin America, as well as in Africa, on how are they going to regulate, or how are they going to at least rein on tech companies, because these tech companies are not just operating in one region, they operate on a global scale. And so I think it would be very interesting, not just for Indonesia, but also for the rest of Southeast Asia, to evaluate and sort of observe the implications of the EU AI Act, for instance, or the Digital Marketers Act, on how, for example, Apple, Facebook, Alphabet are going to be impacted by such laws. And I think there is an evidence that points to ASEAN or Southeast Asia looking into the EU as the gold standard in terms of data privacy and security. We see this with the promulgation of the Personal Data Protection Act across Southeast Asia, where the gold standard is the EU GDPR. And I see the trend moving forward that I think a lot of people in governments in Southeast Asia, but also ASEAN Secretariat, paying close attention to what's going to be the implications of the EU AI Act to tech companies. So I think that would give us some insights on how we can definitely regulate tech companies moving forward.
Thank you very much. Yes. Yes, Mr. Jonathan, please.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add on to Excellency's point here, just to address your question as well. I'm actually supporting the ASEAN information sector. So the senior officials are responsible for information and media. So 2 years ago, we set up the ASEAN Task Force on Fake News. This task force is actually made up of tripartite representatives, namely the ASEAN officials, fact checkers, essentially the agencies that are doing the fact checking from the respective countries, and then of course a media representative as well. And what they discuss at this meeting on a twice yearly basis is really to exchange views about, in particular, about good practices, and that also pertains to good practices in regulating social media platforms. And for the framework that were put in place as well as the guidelines, in fact, last year we also have announced two other new policy pronouncements, one of which is really setting in place a vision statement for 2035 for the media sector. And one thing that I emphasize on is really on critical thinking, leveraging and optimizing digital tools to fight fake news, and of course on effective evidence-based public and strategic communications. And we also emphasize on attention literacy as well, in fact, all forms of literacy. But just going very specifically to your question there, where these guidelines and frameworks and policy pronouncements are concerned, it doesn't really touch on, say, imposing the regulations, say, of social media platforms. Having said that, we have been quite inclusive because we have actually worked with Google, Facebook as well. In collaborations with them, we have actually done fact-checking workshops. And these were actually proposed by a member state. And then, of course, the rest of member states came together to workshop in the collaboration with Google and Facebook. And I don't think we'll stop there. I think that we will also reach out to other social media platforms as well. In fact, we have had just organized an online forum on discussing about fake news just last week. And then I think it's a public forum, so it's a virtual meeting, but I trust that there were representatives from TikTok and other social media platforms there as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, reiterating the importance of including digital platforms also in the conversation. At this point, I would like to invite Ms. Fitriani and maybe Ms. Peter to give some comments regarding the discussions that we had so far.
Thank you for the speaker that have been kindly provide the input for the improvement of the first volume of our research. As Mark mentioned, yes, this is just the first term. And as Padamar was mentioning, we will then reach to the civil society. We did actually invite them as part of our focus group discussion. But at that point, the discussion was saying that if we demand the civil society as well as the fact checker, while we don't provide demands more to the government to provide funding and conducive environment for the fact checker to live and continue on working, because when there's news that are not approved by the government, they would be flagged as disinformation. So our first because CSIS is closer to the government, and if we want to provide information, first we kind of talk to the government, then to the ASEAN Secretariat, and then we would like to then talk to the civil society in the region. How can we do better? As was mentioned by Padamar very correctly, there's a hesitancy of addressing the source, and we know there's bigger, bigger actor behind the creation of this information that sometimes is untouched by the civil society. So we go first to the state, regional actor, and then while doing it, we would want to increase capacity for the civil society, but we take on the input and insight, and we hope that we can collaborate more, because this is just the first part of the research. We will then invite you all in this room to come again together for the next periodic meeting in the end of this year. Hopefully, we came up with a more um, implementable and implementive and solid way of how the civil society together with the stakeholder can together address the disinformation. And I'm sorry that I was so nervous during the presentation. I would like to introduce my fellow researcher in writing this report, which is Mr. Balthazar Satya and Mr. Peter Panedy. That is present here with me. Thank you.
Thank you. We have now reached the end of our session. Once again, thank you to each of our panelists for their time. It was truly fruitful and insightful discussion. Please give a warm of applause for all of our panelists today. Yes, I would like to give the floor back to Ms. Aaron as our MC.
Thank you very much. I would like to invite all the speakers to take pictures together with our researchers too. So, please.